The streets of South Africa are full of stories of power and survival. Gangs have changed more than just crime in South Africa. From the busy streets of Cape Town to the forgotten corners of Johannesburg's townships, they have etched their names into the country's very character. It wasn't enough for these groups to just smuggle drugs or demand money. They grew into shadow powers with rules of violence, fear, and loyalty. Some had iron hands over prisons, while others turned whole neighborhoods into strongholds. Behind their rise lies a dark history of poverty, politics, and rebellion that explains why these gangs remain unforgettable forces. In no particular order, these are the 12 most formidable gangs in South African history. The Numbers Gang, 26, 27s, 28s. What is now infamously known as the Numbers started in the 1800s when men who worked in the diamond and gold mines of KwaZulu-Natal were beaten, kept separate based on race, and constantly abused. To stay alive, these men formed a brotherhood that continued into South Africa's jails and grew stronger there, and gradually evolved to the notorious Numbers Gang. People in and around prisons still fear them. They are like an unseen government. The gang is split into 3 dangerous groups. The 26 are the money guys and are in charge of stealing, smuggling, and controlling them. They give money to the organization and make sure that money comes into the system. The 27s are in charge of discipline. They carry out police codes and punish people who break the rules. Then there are the 28s, who are feared for being violent and controlling when it comes to They are the gang's rough guards who use force to keep things in order, or in chaos. There is nothing else like initiation. New members have to go through rites, secret oaths, and getting tattoos that mark them for life. You can't get out once you're inside. It's written in scars to be loyal. Their language is a mix of numbers, gestures, and hidden messages that guide every move. It is so hard for outsiders to understand. The Numbers Gang has power in the streets, as well as the jails. Cape Flats gangs often follow their directions, which brings money back to the group. Because the gang has more power than the wardens in many jails, guards have been caught working with them. Over the years, they've been responsible for riots, in jail, and even the wardens who dared to cross them. Facilities as a whole have been turned into battlefields, where the state's control ends as soon as the numbers act. In South Africa, you can't run a jail without their permission because of what they represent. That's why they are one of the most feared groups. The Americans. Cape Town was already very poor, full of and rife with gang fights. In 1983, a man named Jackie Lante rose to power out of all this chaos. He started a gang that offered him money, power, and influence because he was interested in the American dream. People in America were born at that moment. American street teams were so big that they built an umbrella structure that covered Cape Flats, so they split into smaller groups, such as the Ugly Americans and the Young Americans, and each one wielded some level of influence in the flats. They were involved in bribery, trafficking, smuggling abalone, and even trafficking people. They found a way to own anything that could make them money. It was famous that they were rivals with the Hard Livings gang. The streets of Cape Town were because of turf wars between groups fighting over and power. Residents had to deal with outs every day, and people in the neighborhoods were afraid of stray. Though there were constant fights, the Americans kept growing. Because of their size, structure, and power, they were one of the most dangerous crime groups in South Africa's history. The name Americans still makes people scared on the Cape Flats, which shows how strong one man's idea of an imported dream could become. Yet their enemies were not strangers, but brothers, twins who built an empire on and connections around the world. Their names will always be linked to crime in South Africa, both for how powerful they were and how brutally they were brought down. Hard Livings. Rashid and Rashad Staggy, twin brothers, started the Hard Livings in 1971 in the poor neighborhood of Manenberg. They would go on to become one of the most feared gangs in South Africa. The Staggies ran their gang like a business, not like a smaller neighborhood gang. The twins, who were in charge, sat at the top. Guards, sellers, and runners were below them, and each had a job to do. The organization was built to last, and it did. It wasn't just Cape Town that the Hard Livings lived in. Through their connections with the Chinese triads and the Sicilian mafia, they were able to get and a steady flow of cash. Their crime business included everything from selling and prostitutes to illegal. People in Hard Living had networks instead of numbers like Americans did. but power brought. Rashad Staggy had a terrible end in 1996. He was dragged out into the streets and alive because he was thought to be spreading in the area. The event shocked the whole country and showed how much people in Cape Town hated gangs. The kingdom did not fall though. Rashid kept going, but he later met his brutal end when he was in 2019. There was a lot of violence left behind by the hard livings. Their story shows that in South Africa's gang wars, power doesn't bring peace. It just keeps the flowing. As the piled up, Cape Town's criminal underworld had plenty of new people to fight. Each gang grew out of poverty and a desire to take over whole neighborhoods. There was one thing that was always true in South Africa. The rules of life were being changed by the gangs. The Firm. The criminal world in Cape Town had become very wild by the 1990s. There were bloody turf wars between dozens of gangs, and the trade was split up into different networks. Next, there was a risky test called The Firm. Unlike street gangs, which are made up of many smaller groups, The Firm was meant to look like the Italian Mafia. Instead of endless fighting, it tried to bring all the leaders together under one roof by making a council of bosses who would settle disagreements, divide profits, and make sure everyone followed the rules. South Africa was hit hard by the mandrax trade in the late 1980s and early 1990s, giving the gang a lot of power. A lot of pills that were shipped through ports or smuggled across borders were given out, which made people more addicted in cities and villages. The Firm also had power over the taverns and shebans, which were bars where extortion was common. They made you pay tax if you had a booze store in their area, or they would beat you up. At its peak, the Firm was run by feared figures like Glenn Kahn and Ernie Lastig Solomon, whose names were linked to power in Cape Town's crime world. They kept the peace between rival gangs, which was an unusual move to make South African organized crime more professional. Peace talks stopped fights with guns for a while, which made violence less likely. But there is never peace in the underground. There were disagreements about goals, changes in loyalty, and deception. Crackdowns by the police made their work less effective, and distrust within the council hurt it. Even though the Firm's plan to become a South African gang failed, it left a mark. It was the first real cartel-style system in the history of gangs in the country. This shows how far organized crime had come. And as the Firm fell apart, new players stepped up, including a notorious gang with a name that sounds too good to be true. Sexy Boys. Do not be fooled by the name. There was nothing sexy about the Sexy Boys. This gang quickly became one of the most feared in Cape Town after coming out of Belhar's Chestnut Place. The group's boss, Jerome Donkey Boosen, was famous for both his criminal empire and the fact that he had survived multiple attempts to kill him. Donkey almost became a mythical figure. He was shot many times but kept living, and each time he did, his image got better. The Sexy Boys and other Cape Flats gangs both made a lot of money by selling mandrax and demanding money. Businesses, taxi drivers, and even regular people in the neighborhood were taxed. People who fought back were given harsh lessons. Drive-by killings became their signature, making people in the neighborhood afraid. The gang's reputation for violence got so bad that even their enemies were careful when they challenged them. The Sexy Boys were unique because they could change. When other gangs broke up because of stress, Donkey kept them together. He was careful as he moved, making deals with other people, keeping his power base safe, and staying one step ahead of the police. In court, his name came up a lot in big cases, but it was harder to find results. A lot of witnesses were scared to speak out, and Donkey's near-death experiences made people think he couldn't be hurt. The Sexy Boys are still a major force in Cape Town's crime world. Police have been able to stop some of the gang's operations, but the bosses still have power, and their reputation for harsh punishments has never gone away. Mongrels. The Mongrels are one of Cape Town's oldest gangs. They have been around since the days of District 6. Before the 1960s forced removals caused by apartheid, District 6 was a lively, multi-ethnic neighborhood. However, it was also a place where crime and poverty led to the formation of close-knit street gangs. Gangs didn't go away when families were moved and sent to the Cape Flats. They got back together in the new villages and were even more angry and mean than before. It was the Mongrels that were one of the toughest. They became well known for running bars in the drug trade. As mandrax and then tick crystal meth spread through South Africa, the Mongrels controlled who could sell and where. They were forced to be in groups through violence. When another gang came into their area, fighting broke out. The hard livings and the Americans Two other big names in Cape Flats gang culture were their biggest competitors. A lot of people died in these groups' turf wars, and regular people were often stuck in the middle. But among gang members, the mongrels were looked up to in a way. People thought of them as old school because they were men who still followed routines, codes, and traditions that had been around since the beginning of Cape Town gangs. The mongrels kept their tradition alive, even as new gangs sprung up with flashier styles and ties around the world. They stood for continuity and reminded people that the Cape Flats gang problem wasn't just about drugs and money, but also about generations that had been affected by violence, poverty, and moving around a lot. Ghetto Kids, GK. In South Africa, the Ghetto Kids are the rough-and-tumble face of the next generation of gang violence. The mongrels are the old guard. This relatively new group started in Hanover Park, which is one of the most dangerous areas on the Cape Flats. Poverty, unemployment, and a lack of hope made it a great place for young members to grow up. The GK made their mark without caring about what other gangs thought. They were not based on family ties or long practices. Most of them were teens and boys who should have been in school but were carrying guns that were almost as big as them. They became popular because they were known for not being afraid of anything and being unpredictable. Taking out a gun was a badge of honor for them. That made older bosses want them, and they used the GK as cheap foot soldiers in drug wars. They were in charge of some of the drug trade in Hanover Park, ran extortion rings in the area, and were involved in thefts all over the city. But the killings they did to get back at people who hurt them really made their name. Because of the way people could get back at each other, Hanover Park became a war zone after just one killing. In some weeks, residents said that dozens of people had including mothers mourning boys and children caught in the crossfire. Fear paralyzed whole blocks. It was even more dangerous that these young shooters didn't follow any rules or follow any order. Laughing Boys. The Laughing Boys are a different kind of animal that you can meet in Johannesburg if you go north from Cape Town. The name sounds like something fun and harmless, but it has a scary image behind it. From their homes in Westbury and Eldorado Park, these gangsters made a name for themselves in Johannesburg's huge townships, which are a mix of very poor and very wealthy areas. Drugs are their major business. They sell everything from marijuana to crystal meth in the neighborhoods of Johannesburg. They get some of their power from blackmail, though. Small companies, taxi associations, and even street vendors had to pay the Laughing Boys a tax or get violently punished. Their scary style was what made them stand out. In public, they might smile, laugh, and joke around, but that same night, they might do a brutal hit. Because of that strange paradox, they became symbols of Johannesburg's gangster culture. Killers who saw killing as just another day's work. The Laughing Boys have been at odds with rival gangs for a long time. Every time they fight, there are gunfights and deaths. There have been crackdowns by the cops, but they are still deeply involved in the city's criminal underworld. In many ways, they show how contradictory Johannesburg is. It's a city of glitz and grime, of laughing and violence. Terrible Josters. Back in Cape Town, the Terrible Josters have a reputation for being faithful, not for being good leaders. They became one of the most violent neighborhood gangs in the Cape Flats. They were known less for building empires and more for being shock troops. The Josters were hired by bigger gangs, like the Americans and the Hard Livings, when they needed more muscle. Their strongholds are in close-knit towns where pride in one's home is paramount. They were known for sneaking up on people and attacking without warning, which is how the Josters got their name. On the ground, they were the ones who pulled triggers, paid off bills, and kept rival gangs away. At the top, they weren't the ones who planned drug routes. The Josters were very dangerous because they were ready to attack first and without notice. When word got out that Josters were moving, whole blocks would break apart. Their raids, which were often done in open daylight and left broken windows and bodies in their wake, made them famous. Even though they weren't as big as the Cape Flats giants, their partnerships with bigger gangs helped them stay strong. People still remember the Terrible Josters as some of the roughest foot soldiers the Cape Flats has ever seen. They are a warning that even small names in South Africa's gangland can have big effects. Junkie Funky Kids, JFKs. The Junkie Funky Kids, also known as the JFKs, are a gang that comes from the same place where some of Cape Town's most dangerous thieves got their start. But the JFKs like chaos, more than the structured syndicates that plan their operations with military accuracy. Even experienced thieves feel uneasy around them because they are the unpredictable wildcards. They are mostly teenagers and young men, and their identity is linked to and the carefree spirit of youth. They move around on meth, and tick, and at the smallest provocation, street corners turn into battlegrounds. Nothing about the JFKs is unique, not their size or wealth, but how quickly things changed. They might be enforcers for a bigger group one day, and then be in a dangerous fight with people they thought were on their side the next. Their image is based less on being in charge, and more on being unpredictable, which is a bad trait in Cape Flats, which is already a dangerous place to live. People in the area know that seeing the JFKs means trouble, like a theft, a beating, or even worse, an unprovoked during the day. Their crimes aren't always motivated by money. Sometimes they happen just because they're scared or high. The Cape Flats have a weak balance of power, and the junky funky kids are the storm that no one can see coming. Because of this, the danger they pose seems much bigger than it really is. Fancy boys, nice time kids. The fancy boys and the nice time kids may sound like harmless or even fun names, but on the streets of the Cape Flats, these names mean only fear. Both groups are based in neighborhoods and have deep roots in the same poor areas where the bigger gangs started. They look like small-time groups at first glance, more like cliques than syndicates. They aren't very big, but they make up for it with outbursts. What they do for a living is extortion. Businesses in the area, street vendors, and even taxi drivers have to pay security money or risk being beaten up. Both robberies and happen a lot, and they're often done without thinking. Because they work on a small scale but are very cruel, bigger networks can't do without them. They are often used as ground troops in bigger wars. Violence isn't just a way for the fancy boys and nice time kids to stay alive. It's also a way for them to show that they belong in a city where smaller gangs are easy to swallow up. The irony of their names sounding like kids' names makes the fear stronger. When people in the area hear that the fancy boys or the nice time kids are rolling through, they know they should stay inside. This shows that even groups that seem good can leave on the ground in the Cape Flats. They didn't build empires. Instead, they kept towns in fear and taught everyone that no gang, no matter how small, should ever be taken lightly. Cape Flats Gang Network Collective. The term Cape Town's gangs doesn't just refer to one group, it refers to the whole environment. The Cape Flats were created when thousands of families were forced to move because of apartheid. They are now home to over 130 gangs, each claiming a small piece of land. Gangs grew out of the ruins of broken neighborhoods where family and order had been lost. But the order they made was one of crime. And in the 1990s, groups with names like the Americans, the Hard Livings, the Mongrels, and the Sexy Boys were all over the news. Each was in charge of a different part of the illegal economy, such as dealing, extortion, smuggling abalone, and running. Smaller gangs, such as the Fancy Boys and the Junky Funky Kids, worked with them to form a huge network that made the Cape Flats one of the most dangerous places for gangs to hang out in the world. The murder rate went through the roof, and whole generations were raised, knowing nothing but the circle of crime, recruitment, and the Cape Flats are different because there are so many gangs living there. Wars aren't about countries, they're about streets, housing projects, or even whole blocks. Almost every day, there are that kill several people. People have to pay money to protect themselves. Kids are recruited before they even finish high school, and local businesses are at the mercy of whoever owns the corner. This is the economy of fear. In response, the government set up an anti-gang unit, sent in the troops, and conducted regular crackdowns. But every time one boss falls, a new one often comes up from the ranks who is younger, braver, and more cruel. The police don't have a lot of tools, and corruption makes it even harder to break up the networks. The Cape Flats gangs left more than just on the streets. They also changed the shape of Cape Town. They turned whole areas into war zones, changed the rules for daily life, and turned crime from a few random acts into a thriving industry. They are still a painful reminder of South Africa's past, and a warning about how long-lasting can hold a city hostage. South Africa's gangs shaped history, fueled violence, bred poverty, and corrupted politics. Yet new gangs keep emerging, the story unfinished. Don't forget to like and subscribe. See you in the next video.